Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Jessica, and today I would like to talk with you about animations, how we can bring animations to the web today, and also what kind of tools and APIs we can use to actually achieve that. This talk will also show you this in an example of an Ember application, but there will also be more general principles and also tools that you can use in your Angular app, in your React app, and any kind of other frameworks or vanilla JavaScript that you're working with. But before we get started with the actual topic, I just want to shortly introduce myself. I already said that I'm Jessica, my name. I also currently work as a software engineer at Simplabs, which is a consultancy specializing in Ruby on Rails development, also Ember.js and Phoenix and Elixir. And what I like to do also besides my work is actually writing newsletters. So I'm one of the editors of the Ember.js Times. So if you're curious about Ember.js or currently developing in Ember.js and want to keep up to date what's happening in the community right now, please feel free to check it out. You can just Google it and subscribe to the newsletter. It comes in every week. And also I'm one of the organizers of the Ember.js Berlin meetup, which happens every month in Berlin. So if you're from the town and you're curious about it, or you want to get one of these cute Tomster stickers that looks I think, really cool, then please check out our meetup as well. So with that said, let's actually get into the topic of the talk. We want to talk about animations. And if we as developers think about animations, we oftentimes think about all this everyday work that we do around animations. We might think that, CSS3 animations, I worked with them, if I wanted to style UI elements or wanted to convey the intent of UI elements and in which state they're currently in. We might think about page transitions, we might think about data visualizations that are animated to better give us an idea what data is about, for example, with SVG and D3. But interestingly, there's another pretty big group of animations out there that we not encounter so often on the web. And this actually leads us in the direction of cartoons, right? Because if we think about cartoons, we realize, okay, these are also animations actually, but they have a very different intent compared to the animations we do in everyday work. They actually have the intention to narrate stories, to actually kind of have either an educational or more entertainment related story to tell and actually give it over to us as readers or viewers of these stories. And I find this really interesting because I have been a really great fan of cartoons as a kid, and I still am, right? So I wanted to look deeper into that. And I realized that this antithesis to this informative UX, we try to use animations to inform users on web application, stands in a contrast to this more storytelling-driven approach of animations that we might also be able to tap in our web applications. I never really thought about this before. How would it actually be if I created cartoons or any kind of stories on the web myself, right? So I wanted to dive further and wanted to find out what can we actually use on the web currently to create these stories. And with that said, let's maybe have a look first of all what animations are and what kind of mechanics stand behind animations. So first of all, if we try to find the first instance of animations in history, we might actually go back to the end of the 19th century. So here you can see this 12 photography set of a photographer named Muybridge, The Horse in Motion. You might have already seen this in some other context. And this is quite a notable example because until then it was it was not really a thing that there was something like animation and that he would use different pictures, frames, in a succession to actually create an animation. So what he did, he created this set of photographs of a rider riding a horse across the Palo Alto track, which was actually quite difficult back in this time because you didn't really have the technical advances that you currently have in this year. But he actually managed it after years and years of work to kind of get this really nice shots of different movements of the horse and the rider in a succession. And what he would use then afterwards is a circular device that you could just turn around, and you could kind of put all the images onto a round plate, and when you spin it and look through a certain slit in front of this device, you would actually get an impression like this. You would have this feeling of, oh, now I see all these images in short succession after each other. And I actually have the feeling the the rider is on the horse riding again across the Palo Alto track, right? So this is kind of like interesting if you think about this example, because it shows us that an animation, a frame-by-frame based animation, doesn't need much more than like a sequence of images that is displayed in a certain frequency. And this actually gives us, as a viewer, and this has also a lot to do like with our human psychology and how our brain processes images, the illusion of motion. So we kind of know these are only like separate images shown each after each other, but how this is actually processed in our brain leads us to not being able, after a certain threshold of time between the images is diminished, to actually experience them as distinct pictures. Instead, we extrapolate it, and it seems to us as if there is like a liquid motion between these certain states of images. And this also continues until today. So if we think about modern cartoons, modern movies, and any kind of other animations, we use a similar approach as we did back then in the end of 19th century. We still rely on frame-by-frame animation to actually make this happen. So just think about your movie and you have like, a strip of images that runs through a projector, right? So this is kind of like interesting, and also leads us to this topic of cartoons again, cartoons that are actually frame-by-frame animation-based. And this story of animations is not only something that happens in traditional media, it also continues until today, and luckily also into our favorite medium as developers, into the web. And to get a better understanding for that, let's also have a look like what kind of like tools and APIs are currently out there that we can use. So if we think about that, like if we think about, okay, what's the first tool or that you could use back then to actually create animations on the web, we actually have to go back 20 years ago, like I'm not kidding. And if we go back 20 years ago, we remember there was like some time where like everyone did like this super fancy video games and also like animations on the web, and there was like one specific tool, one specific multimedia platform that was used for either creating or like also sharing this content on the web. And you might already guess it maybe from the color of the slide, right? You go like, this is Flash. I remember these times, right? And it's like amazing, like I looked it up, I wasn't aware of that. Like this was like literally 20 years ago. The first release was in 1969. The same time the Spice Girls really did like their first hits, and also we still had like rewritable CDs, right? So a really long time ago. And Flash has been really popular for not actually until just recently ago, right? Because it enabled creators to really easily have a nice platform to create content without having like very deep technical knowledge about how the browser works, which was really nice. But it also enabled you, if you actually have the knowledge, to use ActionScript to actually make this more flexible. So this was actually really cool. But as we all know, there was a decline in the use of Flash due to different reasons that I probably could talk about in another talk as well. And what kind of followed after Flash was a new technology called HTML5 that actually enabled us to use open web standards, native APIs from the web to create videos, audio, and also animations right from scratch. Really great stuff if you think about it. And in this instance, I also want to shortly mention this really great keynote by Rachel Nabors about like storytelling on the shoulder of giants, in which she also describes how much the different specs and also open web standards empowered her as an artist to actually not only use traditional media to create stories, but also put them onto the web. And she describes and quotes a certain book that talks about the technologies advancing and also what kind of implications it might have for content and story creators to use, that there is this mention of the infinite canvas, a kind of like possibility for us to use like technical devices, like for example iPads, to just like simply create content, share it with everyone, and also not being restricted by the dimensions of, for example, traditional media as you would have it like in a sheet of paper. It's just like restricted. Whereas the web actually can be used in a much more dynamic and more flexible way. And she says also in this keynote that she realized with the advent of many new APIs exploding on the web, that she as a content creator now had a really great opportunity to dive in and actually easily share her new stories with the world just using the web platform alone. And with this, I actually would like to have a look with you at some specific APIs that we can use nowadays. And for that, I actually created like a short demo. And first of all, let's have a look at the HTML5 Canvas API, which I will explain, and how we could use it, for example, in a context like Ember or like some other framework. If you think about the HTML5 Canvas API, to some of us, there might come like this Canvas tag to mind. It's like a simple tag that we can just include in our HTML, and this already gives us an access to a very powerful web API. We also can get access to the Canvas context object. So if we had like an element and we would get an instance of this element and actually check with the getContextToD method for our context, we would get direct access to it and could be able to, later on in our JavaScript, in our component, wherever we are, in which context, to actually interact with it, draw onto the canvas, and do animations. So we can do that. And luckily, Canvas support is actually quite good by now. But if you should be supporting a browser that still doesn't have it, you might have to polyfill it, meaning you would have to add a library that actually enables you to use the features that are currently not supported yet already today with the syntax, and there are many out there that actually help you to do that also with the HTML5 Canvas API. And let's have a look at like a specific example. Like here, for example, we have like a nice component that renders our raccoon hero, and it has like a play button with which we can actually play an animation. So let's build it. First of all, we would create a component, a comic panel component. In Ember, we have like these curly brackets to indicate, okay, this is an instance of component. We can just plug it into any kind of like templates and use it then. We pass a width and a height, these properties. And also what we would do is to create a tag name on our component, like a tag name property, to indicate that if we render this component, we want the wrapper of our component to be like a canvas element, right? Then if we want to draw on the canvas, we first of all have to draw something, right? So I put some time in and draw something. And then we have the sprite, which is kind of like nice to have because as a sprite sheet, we don't have to do several requests to get the different frames of the animation, but like just have to do one request for loading this one sprite sheet. And we would also have to think like, how do we actually get the different images mapped onto the canvas at the right time, right? We have to do some, you can already see it on the left, like the kind of like dimensions right, and find out which part of the sprite sheet has to be there at which instance on the canvas. And what we also would have to think about how we actually load the image, because we don't have like an image tag or something that we can use, but we actually want to get the source of the image and just like draw it onto the canvas directly. We actually have to get it somehow else. And we can just do this manually by creating a new image instance and actually attach an event listener to it. And once the image loads, after we have set like the source, we will actually also set the natural dimensions so we can later on better calculate how it's mapped onto the canvas. So we do all of that, and then we can actually start drawing. Drawing on the canvas can be achieved with the draw image method, which will pass like different parameters, like the dimensions of the sprite sheet and what kind of part we want to cut out and actually pass into the canvas. And also the clear rect function is kind of like interesting because it gives us the opportunity to erase anything that is on the canvas easily. And then later on, we will be in our component and actually listen for the image to have already been loaded. So we can create an observer. It might be something similar in Angular, for example, or React. It's like just a function that listens for changes on a specific key or a specific object, in this instance, pseudo image, which will be loaded just after the image has loaded. And then we can actually do the setup, we get the context, and then we call our draw function for the first time. When we have done this, okay, we have one image set, great. And actually, we want to have an animation, right? And we want to use the play button and stuff like that. So let's get started with this. If we want to run animations, we would have to think about how do we iterate over that? How do we iterate over the drawing and change it like every time as we go? What we can use is a loop function that recursively calls itself using the later method of like the Ember run loop. We have an opportunity to do that. It's like similar to set timeout in vanilla JavaScript. And we say, okay, every 100 milliseconds, please redraw this. And also in the next frame method, we can actually say, by the way, increase the counter so we can actually recalculate the kind of like piece that we want to map on our canvas. Also, we can run and cancel our animation by making use of like an instance of this loop. So for example, if we created one of these loops, we could just like set it as a current loop. And using the cancel method also of the Ember run loop, we can say, okay, once we actually toggle a flag that can be toggled via clicking on the button, we can say cancel this loop, so we can just like pause the animation, right? And once we have done that, we are already good to go, and we can actually say, okay, let's look at this animation. Now I just wonder if I can get out here. Can I do it? Ah, cool. Perfect. So our raccoon finally flies into the streets of Bochum and tries to save the citizens. Really cool. And now that we have seen this, we realize, okay, this was actually a lot of like wiring up, right? So maybe there's something that's a little bit more straightforward to get started with our first animation. So let's also have a look like a very interesting API I find, which is just like starting to emerge and is still like in the phase of being fully developed, and this is like the Web Animations API. And I find it really interesting because a lot of people say it's like kind of like the animation of the future because it has a really compelling way to use it. And if we look at the browser support, we are kind of like a little bit disappointed. We go a little bit like, okay, can I use like seriously? Like so many browsers don't really support it yet, and some kind of like partially, right? So that means maybe we shouldn't use it right now, right? But obviously, of course, the community has us covered, and a lot of like great open source contributors already created a very nice animations polyfill that you can use. So you can just like use the features of Web Animations API already today without having to worry that it doesn't work. Also, of course, if you're in Ember land, but probably also in Angular and React land, there are like add-ons specifically for that. In Ember, for example, you could just go into command line and just do an Ember install Ember Web Animations Next polyfill and already have like the polyfill shim configured in your application out of the box and can just like use it. This is really nice. Let's see how it actually looks like. If you're already familiar with CSS3, you already know about like the keyframes and how we can use them to actually create animations by setting different style states in our animation. And similar to that, actually, the keyframe effects look like in Web Animations API, right? So you see kind of like a similarity between how these kind of like stylings are just put in a list similar to the keyframes you're already familiar with in CSS3. This is really great. So let's maybe also have like a look at a short demo. We would like to have also a comic panel again, and we would like to animate something on it, right? So we do our drawing again. Takes a lot of time, but we did it. And then at some time point, we actually want to create this keyframe. So we might want to create like a character object, an object that, yeah, kind of like does all the configuration for animation for us. First of all, we create the keyframes. We want to shift through the sprite sheet from the top to the bottom. And also what we would like to do is actually set animation options. So we want to say it should be like 500 milliseconds, for example, and it should step through 5 times because we have like 5 frames in the sprite sheet, right? We want to actually not just like shift through because then it looks like a lottery machine or something. We actually wanted to step through step by a distinct amount. And also we want just to loop over it forever. So we do that. And then we pass it into our comic panel. And then we can just, in our component, say, okay, once actually the component has been inserted into the DOM and did render, so this is what happens after the did render hook is called in Ember components, we could just get our keyframes, our animation options, and use the Animate function that is supplied to us by the Web Animations API to just like simply do the first animation. And this is pretty cool, I think, because it's like super straightforward. Like this just took us like a few lines of code to get our first animation started. And I find this really exciting. So, I mean, a character in front of a blank screen is maybe not that super interesting yet, but maybe let's make it a little bit more complex, right? Let's maybe add a background layer to it that can also animate. So multi-layered animations are actually also kind of nice to do in the Web Animations API, because in the Web Animations API, we can actually group effects, as we can see in a bit. First of all, to actually make this happen, we would have to create layers in our comic panel component that can be synchronized during the animation. And for example, each comic layer could take care of the state of the animation, kind of like set up the keyframe effects for our parent component, comic panel, to actually navigate through. So let's do that. Let's put the comic layers in there and actually say in each comic layer, anytime the layer is rendered, please get the element instance, create the keyframe effect that is appended to this element instance, like the comic layer. So we know this element should actually be animated with this certain configuration in the keyframe effect. And we send an action, which means a function, or like we do a function call that can actually manipulate the state of the parent component up with this keyframe effect. So the parent component, the comic panel, actually has like access to that for starting and stopping the animation. And here in the parent component, we can say, okay, we have a function, and the only thing it does is looking at the timeline, which is a global object that we have available in the Web Animations API, where you can just like queue all the animations and have like always an opportunity to look them up. We get all the keyframe effects that we got from the comic layers, and we create a group effect, also part of the Web Animations API, that allows us to group all of these animations together and to start or stop them whenever we want. We create an animation out of the group effect, and then later on we pause it because we don't want to do autoplay, right? It's a little bit rude. And then we just like set the animation. And last but not least, we can use Ember's actions, and probably similar handlers exist like in Angular, Ember, Angular, React, and Vue apps as well, where you can actually define that once a user clicks on a certain element, this gets executed. So we have a play action and also a pause action to actually play and pause the animation. And play and pause, by the way, this is like nothing that I now wrote in my code. This is like also part of the Web Animations API. It's just like a simple method call. You can just now say, okay, please play this. No further setup required. And now that we've done this, we'll get out of the slides again, and you can see that if we now play the button, we have the opportunity to have two very distinct animations synchronized next to each other, and also being able to, being played and paused together. And I find this kind of like compelling because it makes it really easy to create even more complex, more multi-layered animations that have different animation options attached to them. Well, it's pretty nice. Yeah, so let's go to the epilogue. You now saw like two very interesting APIs, I hope, and learned a little bit about like how we can do animations on the web today. And the story still continues, and I hope you get a better understanding of what you can do to create your own animations and tell your own stories, and that you can see that with the love of your favorite framework and open web standards, you are actually able to achieve this today. And with this said, the web is yours to be animated. I thank you very much for your attention, and have great fun at RuhrJS.